so you referenced Puck already. That for anybody who's listening who's not familiar with the Puck, he's an F-14 pilot who I did an interview with a year or two ago. I'll put a link in the description or up above so you can go and look at that. But he was talking about some of the cheats that would be used in order to get the aeroplane to max perform. And I just wondered whether or not at the point at which you got there, that stuff was all once again being sort of consigned to history as something they used to do, but now there's no point in even trying it because that's not the mission of the aeroplane anymore. I was just sort of curious to know whether culturally that was still a done thing.
So it definitely was, because it's still, BFM, just like, other missions, even if it won't translate directly to a combat skill, the pilots are the more BFM they do, the more familiar they're getting with the aircraft. The more a Rio does BFM, the more familiar he's getting with threat nose positions, being able to perform, maintain sight, operate systems under G's. And we all knew we were going to the F-18 at some point. So having those skills was still trained to. Some of the cheats or hacks that I saw, these were reserved for senior pilots. So the guys that I went through the RAG with, they never really had an opportunity to do this. But and I might be repeating some of what Puck said, but the F-14, the two hacks that I would speak to, the one is the variable wing sweep. So if you were fighting an F-18 per se, and you were able to manually put the wings back, if you did that manually, you could be at any airspeed probably above 300 knots, still maintain control of the aircraft. However, a non-savvy F-18 pilot, if he came to the merge with a Tomcat that had its wings completely swept back, when they're in the auto mode, they're only going to go the whole way back, approaching 450, 500 knots. So that pilot will assess, I'm coming to the merge with an aircraft going 450 to 500, and I'm going to execute my best BFM game plan based on that. However, if the wings were manually swept back and you come to the merge with 300 knots, that F-14 is going to do stuff that the F-18 pilot wasn't expecting. And if he gets a bite at that first merge and really throws that F-18 pilot off, that Tomcat's probably going to win that fight. So that was one interesting hack I saw. The other one was putting the flaps down when you were in a slow speed fight. I'm sure Puck talked about that. I didn't have the chance to watch that far into the video, but I saw a couple individuals who could slow speed fight the Tomcat better than I could even imagine. There was one specific case where we were doing a 2v2 against some F-16 pilots, and the Tomcats just wiped the floor of them. And one of the things that helped was, putting the flaps down in a slow speed fight.
Can you describe then? You've already said that BFM is a pilot's game, and you can help with being an extra set of eyes and helping to assess, what the threat is doing, that kind of stuff. I'm always really interested to hear about the ebbs and flows in the dynamics between front seater and back seater. In the Air Force, there are very clearly camps. There are the single seat guys who will die single seat, fight and die single seat, and
Sure.
they'll never want anybody in the trunk. There are other guys who say, no, if you think that way, then you just haven't got it right. And that extra pair of eyes, the extra brain, the extra, manager of the weapon system of the battle space while you're flying the airplane, that stuff is, makes a massive difference. It's a game changer. So, and you can see when you talk to people from different eras that the dynamics between front and back seat change. And you talk to a Strike Eagle guy who flew in the 90s, and they'll say, well, I ran the radar, the back seater ran the radar up till the merge. Talk to a Strike Eagle crew now, and they'll say, no, the pilot runs the radar the whole time, from all the way out until the merge. What were you seeing as a young guy then, in terms of? I mean, the F-14 was designed as a crewed airplane. That's right. That is how it was built. That was how it was intended. What were you seeing in terms of the relationships between front seaters and back seaters? And then, just because I like to ask lots of questions in one go and then stop talking, what was your role? Were you expected to keep quiet? Were you expected to talk a lot if you're in the back seat? Are you supposed to give the guy some advice and say you slow speed up, or and how do you internalize what you have to do? Because I guess if it all goes wrong and you get shot down, then you're going to die too. So
Absolutely. I wish I could give you a very clear-cut answer. I'll give you the most Top Gun sounding answer possible, which is it depends. And I think what made a good Rio was being able to adapt to, one, the pilot you were flying with, two, the situation that you were in that day. I'll start off answering your question, leveraging our BFM discussion a little bit, and I think that'll probably lead to some more, hopefully, insights that I can provide. One of the things I think I learned early on and was taught to us is that, one, we were a crew. And the Tomcat was designed, it made it pretty easy. There was stuff in the front seat that I had no control over. There was stuff in the back seat that the pilot had no control over. So you had to know those systems because you were the only one who could operate those systems. That was a little more clear cut than it was in the F-18 community when I got there. Back to the BFM topic, the way I always saw it was that the human brain can only process and then react to so much information at any given time. And what I tried to do as a Rio in BFM was work with my pilot to see what was falling out of his scan so that I could say one or two things that he could react to without having to have a whole lot of processing capability. For example, when we would set up for most likely a defensive BFM perch set where you're basically setting up so that the attacking aircraft is 40 to 50 degrees off your tail. You start either a left or right turn to set that up. And what you're training to is, you're in combat, you look out and you see that you're in a threat envelope and you need to, defeat any initial employment and at least neutralize, if not get an offensive advantage. Well, when you're setting up for that, both the pilot and the Rio are looking out, over their left shoulder in a turn. It's then going to be under G. Well, the pilot is not looking through the HUD. He's looking outside. And something's going to fall out of his scan. It could be it's not a level brake turn. It could be he gets slow on his airspeed. Well, what I could do is I could momentarily peek inside, take a look at the airspeed, and then just say something that was effective, such as 10 knots slow or 20 knots slow, or level your turn. So he could make some minor adjustments while still maintaining sight of that aircraft and not have to come inside and look through his HUD or down at his instrument panel to see that. Same thing throughout any sort of engagement, where if he loses sight, he can tell me, hey, I lost him. And I can just say, right 5 o'clock, 10 high, or more applicably, brake right. He's at our 5 o'clock, 10 high. So being directive over descriptive, but having that good working relationship where I can tell something to the pilot, he will, he has his trust in me. He will move the jet, and then we'll sort it out afterward. So that was how I saw that relationship working. And I think also the more you understood about BFM, the more a Rio understood BFM concepts, the better Rio you could be to help your pilot out.
were you at any point during your time flying, well, I suppose the Super Hornet or the Tomcat, were you hard crewed? I mean, did you get to a point where you kind of would be in sync, in inverted commas, with the person in front and you would kind of know what they were thinking?
Yes, very much so. What we would try to do is when we started a certain workup phase, to the maximum extent possible, we would try to keep a pilot and Rio crewed up so that they could go through that phase of training together. Now, if you were just flying a jet from Oceana to Fallon, maybe you didn't necessarily need to be with that person, but when you were doing tactical training, by being crewed up with the same person, you got to know just those things that I previously mentioned, like, hey, this always falls out of their scan, or hey, I know they're really good at this, so I don't need to worry as much about that. And just developing that working relationship made you a much more lethal crew.
Well, one question I wanted to ask you about then, and I think it relates to this, is the going to the boat piece. And in the back of the Tomcat, you've got no control over what the aeroplane is going to do, no throttle or stick or anything like that. And how you sort of, or did you become comfortable being in the back of an aeroplane that was landing on the boat, sometimes perhaps in, at night or poor weather or rough sea type conditions? And what are you thinking as you come into the groove, the quarter of a mile, call the ball whole thing, that everyone knows from Top Gun, as somebody in the back who's really just a passenger?
Sure. So the way I thought about operating around the boat, and again, we get all the training on the procedures and, how to operate the boat. And I think one thing that is very hard to translate to somebody who's not been in the community is the only things they ever see are the plat cam footage or the last 20 seconds of that flight. There's a lot that leads up to it. There is a lot of coordination with the ship, with the ship controllers to get you to that point. Where that last 20 seconds is what matters so much. So my mindset around the boat was, I want to do everything I possibly can so that the only thing the pilot has to worry about is getting to a good start and flying a good pass. Now, the Tomcat, depending on who you flew with, there would be certain calls that they would like to hear. A pretty common one was what their vertical speed was, or their VSI. Because one thing that maybe lagged a little bit, or again, just a piece of information that those pilots like to hear was, hey, they didn't need to hear, hey, the ball's a ball low or a ball high. They can see that. They also have an LSO, or landing signal officer, who's going to tell them, hey, you're lined up left, you're lined up right, get back to center line. However, if they were to get behind on the power, one of the first indications of that, along with the LSO, hearing the engine spool down or seeing the aircraft start to drop, is the vertical speed indicator would, decrease. And if you saw that, the pilot could react to that a little bit more immediately than he would if he saw the ball start to come down. For example, you're looking for somewhere, we'll just call it, a 700 foot per minute rate of descent. If all of a sudden you're flying along and it, 700, 900, 1100 foot per minute rate of descent, the pilot hearing that 900, 1100 is going to allow him to get on the power maybe a little bit sooner than, oh, he just saw the ball drop, or he just got a screaming power call from the landing signal officer. So again, just providing one more piece of data for that pilot to help him fly his best pass. But yeah, absolutely. That last 20 seconds, that's really a pilot LSO relationship. However, I think if you ask most pilots, a good Rio, worrying about everything else, worrying about all the communication calls, setting up the navigation, getting all the systems in the back correct, that was instrumental in flying the F-14 around the ship.
Was there a lot of variability within the pilot community then in terms of sort of skill level? I know it sounds like a funny question to ask, but I'm always reminded of that joke. What do you call the guy who graduated bottom from his medical class? Doctor.
Sure.
He's still a doctor, but he was the worst guy in the class, or she was the worst girl in the class, whatever. So I wondered, you hear about, occasionally you hear about guys who get to the boat and then they end up getting sent back home, even though they're carrier qualified, because for whatever reason they just can't do it in an operational environment. Did you see that? Were there people that you would rather not fly with, or there were people who you felt more comfortable with?
I would say there was definitely people I felt more comfortable with. but what I would tie it most to was just experience level. I thought that naval aviation did a very good job of making sure that the right people made it to the right place. So if you were able to carrier qualify in the F-14 in the RAG, then you were going to be able to fly around the boat in the fleet. Now, again, there's always situations where that wasn't the case, but I'd say from a from just a perspective of, hey, we're doing the best training we can, naval aviation and the community did a really good job of that. So my only real comparison to, oh, some pilots were better than others was really just based on experience. The more experience you got, the better you got.